listeners. I'm Molly Sanderson, and these are my teammates. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Maria Luisa Bueno.
Hi, I'm Mary Chaplin.
And we're here with our guest, Dr. Sarah Morrison, today. She has a PhD in planetary studies from Missouri State University. We're promoting an interest in astronomy and an overview of the upcoming 2024 April eclipse.
So, Dr. Morrison, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I actually am not from Missouri originally. I grew up near Washington, D.C. I went to college at Cornell University for my undergraduate degree. And then I went to University of Arizona for my master's and PhD. But now I'm here on the faculty at Missouri State. I'm an assistant professor. I have a lovely group of undergraduate researchers and master students that do research with me. And that's sort of where I'm at right now. I like hiking and that kind of thing when I'm not studying planets and looking up at the stars.
That's cool. Can you tell us, when did you first become interested in science?
Yeah, sure. So I got interested in science pretty early. I didn't really know what science I wanted to go into probably until well into high school. But I was interested, and even now I'm still interested in a lot of different sciences. And so it was pretty early. And I remember some of the first books that my parents took pictures of me holding when I was a baby, even before I could actually read, were about space. And so maybe that was a sign that I was sort of destined to go into astronomy eventually. They sort of joke about that, but so it was fairly early in my case.
And how was your educational experience helped to prepare you to be a professor in university?
I would say, so some of it is, doing well in your classes. So, getting good grades when you can, working hard. But I would say also getting research experience. I started doing research internships when I was in high school, and then continued to do research internships well into undergraduate and so on. So I got exposed to doing research in the sciences early, and that helped a lot. So that's on the research side of things. And then when I was in graduate school, I got teaching experience as a teaching assistant. And that's when I learned that I really liked working with students. And so a lot of times as a professor, you're doing both. You're doing a bit of research, but you're also doing a bit of teaching. So you're trying to get experiences in both. So I got all of that along the way, I would say, in my college sort of paths.
And with having a doctorate in planetary studies, what are some projects that you have been working on it?
Sure. So I first got my start in sort of planetary geology and geophysics. And so some of the first experiences I had were mapping surfaces. So I've mapped the moon with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and I've mapped moons of Saturn with the Cassini mission. So I was working with science teams while I was doing that. And that was like some of my first jobs. And so that it was literally out of this world. It was totally cool. But nowadays, my research has been focusing more on how planets form, and I study how planets and disks interact with each other gravitationally. And so I do a lot of this with studying the orbital dynamics of planets that we know of around other stars. So a lot of the people in my research group, including me, are doing computer simulations of planets. So you're essentially building planets inside computers, and then comparing that to the populations of planets that we actually observe. So that's also out of this world, but yeah.
So leading from all of that information, we're going to now move on to the eclipse side of our topics. And so how has our knowledge of eclipses changed over time, and how have different cultures reacted to them in the past, and what are maybe some different traditions that are happening because of it?
Yes. So eclipses, a lot of times there are these kind of very strange events where, particularly solar eclipses, where, the sun looks different than it normally does, particularly like during a total eclipse. The sky gets dark, but the sun's high in the sky. So it's very it can be very disconcerting. And so sometimes communities sort of viewed eclipses, and sometimes even today still view eclipses as having some kind of sort of special significance. Sometimes it's a negative significance, so it's sort of a bad omen. Sometimes it's more of a good omen. But that being said, humans have been able to predict eclipses actually for a pretty long time. So there's even records going back into the 1300s where people were able to predict eclipses. And so, but that sort of ability, that mathematical ability to predict eclipses has sometimes also been sort of seen as sort of almost spooky, you know, where you could predict these cosmic events occurring, you know, and so it's sort of this very powerful thing to be able to do. And of course, nowadays, eclipses still a lot of times hold a lot of significance for a lot of people. I mean, I know they do for me personally. So I always try to, if I'm near a place that an eclipse is going to be visible, I will try to go. So I went to the annular eclipse this past October 14th in 2023, the annular eclipse. But so they've always held some kind of significance, but it can vary a lot from community to community, whether that significance was sort of bad or good, or maybe it was some mix of the two. But usually it meant that there was, you know, something important going on. And that sort of is kind of a common theme among different communities in regards to eclipses.
You mentioned the eclipse that you went and seen. Can you tell us a little about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So there was this annular eclipse. So that's where the moon is still passing in front of the sun, but it doesn't completely cover the sun. It's sort of, the moon is near the furthest point in its orbit from Earth, so it appears a little bit smaller in the sky. And so it doesn't completely block the sun. Instead, the sun sort of appears kind of as a ring of fire. So sometimes they're called like ring of fire eclipses. It's not visible from everywhere on Earth's surface, so you have to go to, you know, be in the path of the eclipse in order to see it. So I went to Odessa, Texas, which was right near the center line of the eclipse, and so we were able to see the eclipse as it was, you know, becoming an annular eclipse. But if you're sort of outside of those regions, a lot of times you may still see a partial eclipse. So, you know, you may still see kind of a crescent looking sun. So here in Missouri, unfortunately, my understanding was it was cloudy in Missouri. It was rainy. Yeah. But if it wasn't, you would have seen sort of a crescent sun. So it would have appeared as a partial eclipse.
So can you explain to us a little bit, like, what are the difference between those eclipses?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's how the sun appears in the sky and sort of the relative positions that the moon has with the sun during that event. So a solar eclipse generally is defined as when the moon is passing in front of the sun as viewed from Earth. But then if it's a total eclipse, that's where, you know, the moon is completely blocking the sun's light during that stage of the eclipse. If it's an annular eclipse, as I mentioned, it's sort of where the moon is still mostly blocking the sun. It will pass, you know, completely in front of the sun, but it's a little bit further away from Earth when it's happening. And so it'll appear to be more where the sun will be sort of appear as a ring, you know, behind the moon. And then a partial eclipse is where, you know, the sun is partially blocked, hence the name partial eclipse. And then sometimes you can get a hybrid eclipse, which is sort of where it's changing from one type to another, depending on where you are in the path. So in some cases, like you could have a total, you know, solar eclipse that you would see from one area of Earth's surface, but then another area of Earth's surface might see it as an annular eclipse. So that would be called a hybrid eclipse.
And how frequently those eclipses happen?
They actually happen pretty frequently. So they happen like 2 to 5 times a year about, but it's very localized in terms of where you can see them on Earth's surface. And so if you're you know, living in a particular place and you're asking how often am I going to see an eclipse, a solar eclipse, it's not going to be 2 to 5 times a year. It'll be much less frequent than that.
What are your personal experience with viewing those eclipses?
So I viewed quite a few partial eclipses. So partial eclipses, you need eclipse glasses, or you need to, you don't want to be staring at the sun because the sun is still extremely bright. So if you're viewing a partial eclipse, you need special glasses, or make sort of a pinhole projection of, the sun shining through a small pinhole. So I've seen several partials. I've seen one total eclipse that was in 2017. I was in Nebraska at the time, and was in the path of totality, and saw the total eclipse. And then I just saw an annular eclipse, just a couple of weeks ago. I would say out of them, the total solar eclipse is sort of the most different experience. It's not really comparable to any other experience, I think, literally on Earth. And I would really classify it as sort of a religious or spiritual experience. It's one of those things that if you ever do have the ability, or you're going to be very close to where one is going to occur, I would highly recommend making arrangements to go and view it.
So we're trying to tell our viewers about the upcoming April eclipse in 2024, April 8th. So do you know what type of eclipse it is?
Yeah, so it is going to be a total eclipse. And in West Plains, Missouri, you will be lucky enough you'll be in the path of totality. So hopefully it won't be cloudy. Even if it were, you would still notice things. You would still notice differences, like you would still notice it getting dark and that kind of thing, even if it were cloudy. But it will be a total eclipse. And the next one won't be in North America, won't be for a long time. So if you're going to see it, you should see the one in 2024. I think the next one is I think it's 2045 is the next one in North America. So if you're, again, they occur 2 to 5 times a year, but if you're thinking about being, in a, also having it pass through North America, the, path of totality, 2045 is a long time away. So 2024 is the one to go to.
Yeah. And do you know when the last total eclipse here was?
Yeah. So the last one was in 2017. That one, the path of totality didn't go quite through West Plains. It did go through Missouri. It was sort of northern Missouri. But that's probably the most recent last total solar eclipse. So it would have been a very deep partial eclipse as viewed from West Plains in 2017.
How can people prepare for the eclipse?
So what I would recommend is trying to pick some possible places you might go to view it. And keep in mind that even though if you are going to be in the path of totality, during the actual totality, you will not need special glasses to view the sun. If you want to see the stages of the eclipse leading up to totality, you should probably try to get eclipse glasses or make a pinhole projection device. So those are pretty easy to make. You can get like 2 paper plates and poke a hole in one. And then essentially you're trying to get the sunlight to shine through that hole and then project an image of it, onto the other plate. So that's another way that you can view different stages of the eclipse without, looking directly at the sun. But the other thing I would do is have a few candidate places that you think that you might want to go to during the actual eclipse. It'll be happening about midday on April 8th. So it's sort of look up the exact times for the locations you're planning to go to. Plan to get there not during totality, but sometime before. So one, there may be crowds of people. So if you show up right at totality, it might be crowded. But also that way you can see the partial stages of the eclipse, if you're there earlier. And keep in mind, luckily the sun will be fairly high in the sky at that point. So you won't have to worry as much about, if there are like trees nearby, you want to sort of make sure the sun's not going to be, where, a building or something is blocking it, where you're blocking your line of sight with the sun. So those are some of the things that I would sort of plan for. And that being said, eclipse glasses, you can, there are places you can buy them online. The main thing is make sure they're up to standard so that, you're actually able to view the sun through them without blinding yourself. And And then I know that there are also a lot of places like museums and universities that may be handing them out for free as well. So try to get your hands on some eclipse glasses, but even if you can't, using those pinhole projection devices can help too. Just don't stare at the sun. That's the main message there.
About how dark will it get?
Like it's still light enough that like you could read. But that being said, the quality of the light is sort of very different than anything else I've ever experienced. So when I was in totality in 2017, I would say, so you're still seeing light from the sun's corona. So that is still, so even though the moon is blocking the main disk of the sun, the light from the corona is still shining around the moon. So there is still somewhat light. But the light is sort of more silvery in color. So if you're sort of familiar with like golden hour around sunrise and sunset, where like everything sort of looks golden, this is sort of more where everything sort of has a silvery hue. So it's sort of a very different kind of light than people are sort of used to seeing from the sun. Even though the corona's there all the time, it's just that most of the time, most of the light that's coming from the sun is coming from the main part of the disk of the sun, not from the corona. So when you just have the light from the corona, it will sort of look very different. So if you're you could probably still read during a total eclipse, but it will be noticeably darker. You may also notice that the temperature will start to drop during totality. Because of that, sometimes winds will change direction where you are. A lot of insects and birds get confused. And so they may be sort of, you may hear crickets, because they think it's nighttime or, close to nighttime, even though the sun's high in the sky. And the sky will change color. It'll look more like a sunrise or sunset. But it's a little bit different because in this case, the sun is high up in the sky instead of it being low on the horizon. So the sky will change color as well.
How long is it going to last like that?
It depends on how close you are to the center line of the eclipse. I believe West Plains is close to about 3 minutes. Some places may be closer to 4 minutes. So this particular eclipse, the time in totality is a bit longer than some of the previous eclipses we've had. So the one in 2017, I think that one was closer to like 2 minutes. So it wasn't as long. So this one's going to be a bit longer. And so because of that, you may notice more things about like the temperature drop and stuff like that, because there'll be more time for that type of thing to happen. Yeah.
What are you going to be doing on April 8th?
So I'm planning to, so as I sort of mentioned, like for me, it's sort of a spiritual and religious experience to have these eclipses. So, what I'm going to be doing is, I'll be with family, and we're planning to, one of my family members, he has a solar telescope, and he has a lot of cameras that he has solar filters for. So he's going to be doing a lot of photography of the event itself. And I'll be helping him configure his cameras and that kind of thing for that. So I won't be doing as much science on that day. But for people that are, it is a time to be able to do Earth-based observations of the sun's corona, because the moon is, blocking more of the sun's light. So it makes those kinds of studies possible. So for people who are studying what's going on during the actual eclipse, most of what they might be doing is studying the sun's corona. But for me, it's going to be mainly experience the event, experience those 3 minutes, take pictures and be able to share those pictures with my students and so on going into the future after this event.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for talking with us today and helping spread information about astronomy and the upcoming eclipse.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.